Okay, this is the last section of chapter 20. So the other day we did the stuff that aligned with the first part of chapter 20. This will be the second part of chapter 20. And then I've made a decision to skip doing chapter 19 altogether. So this will be the very last lesson for Bio 20, which hopefully is exciting to you. It's really short as well. So we're gonna do this section is on defense mechanisms, the different types of relationships. Then we're gonna look at primary and secondary succession of forests, and then the final part is about forests as well, which is pioneer and climax communities. So the first part, defense mechanisms, it says species do not live and evolve in isolation. Predation and interspecific competition for resources can help shape evolutionary change in four general ways. So species have different defense mechanisms that will allow them to be able to live longer and hopefully pass on their genes to the next generation. The four ones that we've got here, because they're always competing against others, right? They could be a predator or a prey, depending on where they are in the ecosystem, in the food chain. And if we're looking at this, these are some four different ways. So we can have protection, like the armadillo. So he's got sort of like this armor on to protect the inside of his body. Hard to get to the parts where an animal might want to eat. These types of blowerfish can get big, so they're really small and then they can blow up and make themselves a lot bigger. But also, they've got those spikes on them, which doesn't make them seem very tasty for a species to eat them. They can be fast, so these gazelles, they'll run around. Antelopes, they sort of run through the savannah. They can run fast to get away from predators. And then camouflage, this type of bug, I'm not sure what it is, but it sort of looks like a twig. So it's camouflaging in to look like where it lives. Predator-prey relationships are essential for maintaining balance within an ecosystem. So this is a graph of a predator-prey model. So if we look at it, sort of it's showing how these species will cycle. So as the size of the prey population goes up, it's they've got a wide range of them, and then as we look, the predator species is going up just sort of a little bit past it. So they're going up, which gives them more to go up as time goes on, and then as they're higher up, you're going to see a huge crash because there's going to be a bunch more of predators to eat the prey. Then when the prey are low, the predators are going to go down because they don't have as much food. With less predators, the prey is going to go up, so they're going to start building their population. And with there being lots of prey around, the predators will go up, and then the prey will go down. So it's just a cycle, and this is a great relationship that happens in many ecosystems, where it's basically very cyclic, they say. So the cycle is going up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, and there's sort of like a time lapse between them. So when this one's high at its highest point, this one's going to be at its highest point not far after it. Okay, so it's sort of like a time lapse. It's like, okay, we've got lots of food, so now this species is going to go up, and when there's so many of these, it's going to go down. So it's a great way of showing how a predator-prey relationship works. The symbiotic relationships. It says species who occupy similar niches have also evolved to rely on one another in different ways. The types of symbiotic relationships include mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. So the four different types, does it not explain it? It doesn't really. Okay, so I guess we can explain it on these graphs. So a mutualistic relationship, basically what mutualism means, and if I could write here, I would, but I'm not on the iPad. But mutualism means that both species are benefiting from the relationship. So hopefully, this is how most of your friendships are, where by being around the other person, you're getting something positive out of it, and your friend is also getting something positive out of it. So I always call this like a positive positive, and I think I could, if I go out of here, I can write here. So this one is a positive positive relationship. And then if we look at commensalism is a positive nothing. And I'll get to that in a second. And then a parasite is a positive a positive and then a negative. Okay, so mutualism, yeah, positive, positive. They both, by being around each other, they both benefit from it. Commensalism, this is where basically by being around each other, one is not affected and the other one's benefiting. So this is a good relationship, I guess, and at least someone's benefiting and no one's getting a negative part of it, so that's a good thing as well. And then parasitism, that is the last one, where basically one species is benefiting and one is having a negative effect. So this is, if they were around, this species is benefiting, this species is going down. It's not going down very fast, but it is. So some examples of these, if we could think of a mutualism relationship, I don't know if you can think of Finding Nemo, where there's these little fish that eat out of the whales or sharks' mouths. So they get to eat food that's readily available basically in the teeth of these animals. And then the big sharks or whales, well, what are they getting out of it? They're getting their teeth cleaned. So they're not going to have cavities, problems like that. So both, that would be a mutualism relationship. Commensalism, the greatest example they always say is barnacles on a whale. So barnacles are like these little crustaceans that they need something to hang on to survive. So they hang on to the side of the whale. It doesn't hurt the whale, but the barnacles get sort of a place to hold on to. So that's a commensalism relationship. And then parasitism, the best example is like a tapeworm in your dog or cat. So this worm lives inside of the intestines of your animal. The worm has a place to live. It gets food. It's benefiting. Where your dog or your cat is losing its nutrients, so it's getting a negative effect. And people can get tapeworms as well, or there's people that actually do crazy things like insert tapeworms into them so that it can help them to lose weight because the worm will be getting the food and they won't. So there's some crazy things, but either way, that's a parasite or parasitism. Just going back here for a second. So we've done the first two, then we got to move on to the forests. So succession, it says the primary succession is starting from scratch, and secondary succession is starting over after a disaster. So there's some videos here you could watch, but basically I'm going to explain it, is that succession means that it's sort of how an ecosystem goes from being like nothing to having huge trees growing on it. So succession, if we're looking at primary succession, that's starting from scratch. So at the very first of time, or I don't know if like a meteorite or something hits the earth and we start over, that's starting from scratch. So you're starting from bare rock. Once you start from bare rock, the next thing that starts to live there is lichen. Lichen's a fungus bacteria plant-looking thing that can live and start to break down the rock. And by breaking down that rock, it'll help to give nutrients to the soil. Then you're going to start to see some small annual plants. You might see some lichens as well still living there. So short, maybe like grasses will start to grow there along with the rocks and the lichen. And then when we get a little bit farther, we'll have some more grasses, we'll have some herbs, we'll have some perennials, some things that will grow back over time. So perennials, if you don't know, those are things that you can plant in your garden and they will grow year after year. Annuals, those are things that they literally live 1 year. And then the seeds would have to fly back there to grow again the next summer or spring. So once we've got to the end of that, that's basically where we're getting through the pioneer stages. So this is the pioneer environment of succession. So those are all the pioneer plants. Pioneers are like the first to be there on that land. And then we've got the intermediate stages. So the intermediate stages, we will start to grow some more things. So the soil is getting better, and what's making it better over time is the lichen, the rain, things that are breaking down the rock and the minerals so that they can start to create soil. Also, these plants are going to die, right? This is over hundreds of years. So as these things die, microorganisms are going to start to break them down. So there's going to be some organic matter in here, some dead stuff. And that's good because that's going to give more nutrients to the soil. So as these things die, they're helping to build up the soil. And as time goes on, now we've got some bigger species here. We've got grasses, shrubs, some shade intolerant trees, so these trees that need lots of sun, and they're going to be living there for quite some time, like our lifetime for sure, until it gets to a climax community, and that can be several hundred years into the future, where we have trees that can live in more shade tolerant places, so they are able to live sort of underneath trees. Those are going to be the last species to live in an environment. And those would be considered the climax species or the climax community. So once our species get to this point, they are known as being in the climax community. Sorry, I'm just closing my door because my dog is barking. So, this is showing a video. I don't know how. We'll watch it on here, I guess. This is probably not good for my dog. He can hear it and he doesn't like it.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years, that the numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They'd just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behaviour of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds, of migratory birds, started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes, and as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed on it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behaviour of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion. The channels narrowed. More pools formed. More riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilised the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was less soil erosion because the vegetation stabilised that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.
Okay, so that's showing a bit about what the wolves did in Yellowstone National Park, and they're really amazing in the sense that they've totally changed the ecosystem. So not just the animals that live in it, but also the plants and even how the rivers flow. So the main purpose of all that is showing that like all of these species have a really important part within the ecosystem, and yeah, they without them they wouldn't be able to get to the next step. So really important to have those. I think is that the very last slide? I think it is. It is. So that is the end. That's all that you need to do. So I'd like you guys to finish up all of chapter 20, that booklet. It's not very large, I don't think. And remember that there's also the link to the textbook on the Google Classroom. And other than that is once you have passed in chapter 14, 15, and 20, then we skip 16, 17, 18, 19. We skip 4 chapters, but if you could pass in 14, 15, and 20, then you will be done. Okay, so you'll be done bio, and yeah, I will update all of your marks once I get all of that, and we won't have any tests, so you'll be good to go. I'm so excited and glad that I got to have you guys in my class. So have a great one, and yeah, thanks for being in bio 13.